We are going to Kilmainham Jail. I've been before 6 years ago.
This the entrance for the prison?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
You have tickets booked?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Just a quick look at the tickets, we'll get you organised. I think your tour will begin in here at the appointed time. So
Okay, thank you very much.
What's that?
They brought him up and down, isn't it?
We're going to start now, guys. So I'm going to be your tour guide. So, hello. Díobh Giléir agus Fáilte Roimh go dtí Frisin Kildaigh, which is not English, that's Irish. So I'm Harry. That means hello and welcome, by the way. But I'm Harry. So if you have any questions, guys, please feel free to ask. Just as we're going around, it's a very old building, so just watch your feet, watch your heads. Floors are uneven in here, head beams can be low. We're going into a prison. Prisons are built like a maze to stop prisoners from escaping, so please don't try and leave on your own because you won't be able to escape. Alright? You're not prisoners, you're free to go, so if you need to leave, guys, you let me know. I'll help you out. Just don't wander off because you will get lost. And we'll find you here tomorrow. I'll get fired. That's never good. We don't want that, so just please don't wander off. Alright, but that's all the health and safety done. So are we ready to go? And follow me in through here. Just have your tickets ready, guys.
It's from Paddington.
Logan, that's what the prisons used to be like. You're stuck in a room like this.
This jail opens in 1796, making it over 220 years old. When it does open, it is a brand new design for a jail though. Previous generations of jails before Kilmainham don't look like this. What they're like, they're kind of like an open room, like this space here, except they would throw all the prisoners into this space. They didn't really care what they did in here, and so they would become a breeding ground for criminals. So they want to change that. So a group of Quakers go around and they redesign these jails trying to reform the prisoners that come through them. So these become known as reform jails. So the idea is, in a jail, a reform jail like Kilmainham, you're to come out of here less of a criminal than when you come in. Now, does it work? Not really, but that's the intention, at least. And this jail opens in 1796. We close all the way out in 1924. It's a huge chunk of Irish history that we're open for. What happens in that period of Irish history is that outside these walls, guys, 6 armed rebellions take place here against British rule in Ireland, and we also have a civil war. And after, and sometimes during, all of those rebellions, a lot of very famous names make their way in here. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But before I tell you anything about the rebellions, not all of the jail is going to look like this, unfortunately. It's not that nice. So this is not dating to the original design of the jail. So jail opens in 1796, but this is the new East Wing, because this is an extension made in the 1860s. So at that time, it's Victorian times. They have very specific requirements for these jails. So for example, they believe you literally have to shine God's light down on prisoners to help them to reform. So that's why you have the big glass roof shining above our heads. We then have the curved section behind us, which we were just in for a second. If you're standing in the centre there, guys, and if I'm a guard, I'm able to see into each and every one of those cells, and it's intentional. It's to make it easier to supervise. And so it's known as the panopticon design. About rebellions as well, guys, the most famous rebellion we'll tell you about, the whole of the day, is 1916's Easter Rising. So Easter Monday 1916, you have 1,500 men and women taking over buildings across Dublin to overthrow British control. And after 6 days of fighting, they surrender. So the majority of the leaders are kept here in this jail, some of them in this section. But what happens is 14 of those leaders are executed on site here in the jail. So those executions outraged the Irish people. They lead directly to our War of Independence from 1919 to 1921, where we get our independence. And it also leads to our Civil War as well. So it's a very important rebellion in our history. And the reason why I mention that now, guys, is that as we go around now, you're going to see a lot of nameplates above the cell doors. So if you see a nameplate, guys, it's the most famous person to have stayed in the cell and the year that they were in there. 1916 is a very common number to see here in this jail. So I'll start off with Edward Daly. Hi, you guys, we're just in through here. We're just looking up here to our your right-hand side where you see names. So Edward Daly was a leader of our 1916 Easter Rising. He's executed on sight, and that's his final cell there. That's where he stays. Now, the name beside him, though, is very interesting. So there's a lot of 1916s in this jail. Very few of them were not executed, but Eamon de Valera is one of them. So Eamon de Valera was sentenced to be executed, but then there were 90 sentences of execution given. There's a lot of backlash to the executions, so a lot of them are cancelled. Only 16 actually take place. So his is one of the first to be cancelled. He's very lucky to escape execution. And in 1917, because of the backlash to the executions, everyone still in jail is released. So it's known as the General Amnesty. So he's released in 1917. Later on, during the Irish Civil War, he's the leader of the anti-treaty side, which is the side that loses our civil war. And I'll explain that to you better later on. But what it means, Eamon de Valera has another cell here in the jail. He's kept here a second time. Not only that, he's released and the jail closes down, which means Eamon de Valera is the last prisoner ever kept in Kilmainham jail. And still doesn't end there. You tell that to an Irish person, they'll find it quite ironic, because you jump forward again 42 years later, 1966, the jail reopens as a museum, like it is today. And when we open as a museum, first person to come back in here, cut the ribbon and open the place is the Irish president, Eamon de Valera. So, first man out, last man out, first man back in here again as well, technically. But he was Irish president for 2 terms of 7 years, and he was also our Taoiseach, which is our prime minister, for a number of years as well. So dominated Irish politics, Eamon de Valera. A load of nicknames for these people. We always call people by nicknames in Ireland. So he's known as Dev, which is because of his name, but he's also sometimes known as the Long Fella, because apparently he was very tall. So we're really creative coming up with these nicknames that you'll find. But that's our old president. And there's 2 more cells you might see as you walk around in a second. Just down the end, there's a guy called Michael O'Hanrahan, another leader of the Rising who was executed. And behind this bridge, up on the first floor, there's John McBride. Same story goes, that's his final cell as well. But the one cell I want to show you is here, just before we move around, guys. Mrs. Joseph Plunkett, or Grace Gifford. So the name Joseph Plunkett will be important to us on this tour. Joseph Plunkett was a leader of the Rising. He was also executed. The night before Joseph is executed, though, he's given a final wish, and out of all the things he can wish for, he wants to marry his sweetheart, Grace Gifford. So Joseph and Grace do get married in the chapel, which I'll show you next. So we're going up to the chapel in just a few minutes. So I won't tell.
Why can't we see the painting inside?
You can see the painting inside if you want, because we're going to see it now. That's what I was going to say. Grace herself. Oh wait, we have a huge group in Avalon. Hi guys, we're just in through here, so I'll probably repeat it. So what we're talking about is this name here, Mrs. Joseph Plunkett. She's the wife of Joseph Plunkett, and they actually got married here in the jail before the night before Joseph was executed. So we'll actually tell you the full story in just a few minutes. But 7 years after that wedding, Grace herself gets caught drawing anti-government propaganda during the Irish Civil War. So when she gets caught drawing propaganda, she's in here for 6 weeks. She loves painting on her walls, though. And one of those paintings is still visible today. If you look inside the peephole, guys, you'll be able to see the painting. So there's a painting in there of the Madonna and Child. It's called the Kilmainham Madonna, and it's painted by Grace. So you can have a look now if you want.
Does it keep women in the prison as well?
They did. They kept men and women in here. Just by the time the Civil War comes around, there's so many female rebels.
Have a look through there.
This is turned into a women's only section. They would segregate them by gender. And usually it was 4 by 4.
See it?
By this time, we could do it.
Well,
Never
she has a baby
they'd avoid that. That was
and
the big thing.
pictures on the side.
But as well as that, guys, this may look familiar to you for a good reason. 1966, they restore this jail. and they don't get any government funding. So they rented out to film crews to get the funding. So it may look familiar. Rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes, which technically means that the greatest movie ever made is filmed in this jail, and not Shawshank Redemption. So that's great. But as well as that, guys, if you like music, U2 filmed a very old music video in here.
Nice bed, don't it?
Should I lay on it?
Come on, quick.
Oh, that's so uncomfortable.
We're comfy.
No.
Don't have a bed like that. Shall I swap yours for that one?
What?
Shall I swap your bed for one like that?
No. It's uncomfortable. Like when you lay down, it squishes your belly a bit.
Does it?
And always down here. I came here before 5 years ago.
You love it.
No, just anywhere you want inside here, guys, we'll be able to begin. Nobody behind you guys, is there? So, guys, this is Roman Catholic chapel. So, Catholic prisoners who come here on a Sunday, but you also come to Protestant chapel just down and up on the floor of us. But Joseph Plunkett, Grace Gifford, they're supposed to get married on Easter Sunday, 1916. Now, coincidentally, Easter Sunday is the same day the Easter Rising is supposed to take place. So they cancel the wedding so Joseph can take part in the rebellion instead, which I'm sure Grace was delighted by. But the rebellion itself gets postponed one day. So it takes part on Monday, they don't get married, and then because Joseph is to be executed, he's very lucky that they allow him to get married the night before in this room. So the story goes, Grace is brought in through here to meet Joseph with a number of strict rules. They are not allowed to say a word to each other for the whole duration of this wedding, only their wedding vows. They're then only in this room with a priest and 2 armed British guards with rifles, acting as witnesses to the wedding. And finally then, when finished, both of them are separated. And Grace goes off into town, and a couple of hours later, she comes back. She goes into the cell of Joseph, and she's allowed to say goodbye. The problem is, they're only given 10 minutes to say goodbye to each other. In that 10 minutes, worst of all, Grace will say, for 2 people who have all the world to speak about, they can't even bring themselves to say a word to each other. Because they're so full of grief, they know what's to happen next, and only around an hour after that meeting, they bring Joseph out into our stonebreaker's yard and he's executed by firing squad. And so, that story is very famous. It's not only famous in Ireland, it's very famous all across the world for a very good reason. Because, as with a lot of our famous stories, we tend to write songs about them. So there's a song about this story called Grace. So I'm assuming maybe a couple of you have heard of the song Grace. If you haven't heard the song Grace though, guys, what I recommend, on your way home, go on Spotify, look up the song Grace, because you'll find loads of versions. They're all really good. There's no famous version, I guess you could say. So yeah, you'll find a great version there. Just the only thing is, you will not get a good version from me today, unfortunately. I won't be able to sing it for you. I'd ruin the song. But Grace is a beautiful song, regardless. It tells you better than I ever could what happened in this room. And so if you want it, the song's Grace. But one interesting thing, guys, most of this room is unfortunately restored. One thing that is not restored, though, that white altarpiece in front of us, it was in the room at the time. Still survives to this day. But we're going to move on now, guys, because just a quick warning, you were in the very nice part of the jail. That was like the 5-star hotel there. So we're up for a rude awakening now, guys. We're going into the oldest section right now, so if you have any questions, you let me know. We go into the West Wing, just watch your feet and your heads, and follow me now, guys, if you don't. Yeah. So feel free to look inside these cells if you want, guys. Just because of the size of the group, we might have to go down to the last door on the left.
Come on.
Just this one there, yeah, you should be grand. They're all the same though. So, we may just, because of the size of the group, guys, we may just move it down a bit more, just because other than that, you'll have people stuck in the chapel and they won't be able to hear us. That's all. But feel free to look inside the cells if you want, guys. Most of them are all the same. And so, first thing to note here, guys, all of the writing on the walls you'll see around this whole jail, it's all from tourists, not from prisoners. So please don't add to it, because you'll spend the night in here. Alright? But this is the West Wing. You come here 220 years ago when the jail opens. It looks very similar. One major difference at that time, though, they have no glass panes in the windows behind us, because they believed diseases were spread through bad smells. They'd allow the wind to sweep in through the jail, it would get rid of the bad smells, and by their logic, that's going to get rid of disease. Now, it doesn't work. To make it even worse, they'll decide to make these walls out of limestone. You may recognise, and we're going to what's called the 1916 landing now. So if you want, just follow me. If you have any questions on that. Just watch your heads here, guys. Just want to show you exactly where we're going. We're just away. There's only one way to go. Just going down through here, but I'll give you an idea. Where are you from?
Where are you from? Tell him, Logan.
England.
England.
Yeah, whereabouts in England?
Doncaster.
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 Can you speak fluent Irish?
Me? A bit. Now you learn it in school, I mean you learn it from 4 till 18, but I haven't spoken in 6 or 7 years, so people are talking, but not too well. I'd be able to understand most of it, but you know, I wouldn't call myself. We'll fill out here as much as we can, guys, maybe to the second grade there, and then we're good. And all these walkways are safe, you'd be glad to know. It's only collapsed twice in the last year, so it can't happen a third time. That'd be unlucky.
What's the difference between this cells and the other cells?
So it's just the time. There's no time. You're put in here. There's no discrimination. So all the people, you might have taken turns. You stay in here for 2 weeks, then you're brought to the nicer part. If you want to fill out here, guys, just because you might get people stuck behind us otherwise. So this is the last section was 1796. This is an extension from 1840, and then the very nice part is 1860s. So that will be the preferred area. But yeah, you can notice even now there's a bit more light coming into this section, even in the 1840s. But this, guys, is the 1916 landing. So it's where the majority of our leaders are kept after the Easter Rising, before they're executed. After the men and women surrender, though, after 6 days of fighting, they're brought back to places like Kilmainham with rotten fruit getting thrown at them by the people of Dublin. You see, World War I is still going on. Ireland gives a lot of volunteers to that war, and the reason why we fight is we want a home rule parliament. There's a parliament here in Dublin to govern ourselves. Now, the best way to get that parliament is to show loyalty to the British government, people think. So they'll sign up for the military. One poor way to show loyalty is to have a rebellion, obviously, so that's not seen as the most loyal thing. They're seen as traitors. But then the executions take place. You'll find out later, the attitude changes. These names become martyrs in Irish history, which they are today. And so the first cell we'd see as we come in, guys, first cell on the left-hand side is a name, finally. That is there when we see Joseph Plunkett. So it's the same Joseph who married Grace in our chapel, night before he's executed. And that's the cell where they spend their final 10 minutes together. Now, 2 doors down from Joseph, though, is a new name. Again on the left-hand side. Because that is the cell of Michael Mallon. And so Michael Mallon was put as first in command of our St. Stephen's Green garrison during the Easter Rising. And he's also executed after, as a result. please don't mind. Stand up here against this wall. I'll tell you about the man here. So this is the condemned cell. So you've all been condemned to be executed. Congratulations. And this is where you stay. So loads of people, they spend their last nights right in here in this cell. And if you were in here, chances are you're also going to get brought out and executed on site. It's usually what happens. Now, it's the change for one person though. That person is a man behind me here, Robert Emmet. So Robert Emmet, in 1802, he meets with the French Emperor. He goes to France and he meets Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon tells Robert he's going to invade Great Britain that next year. So Robert decides, might as well plan a rebellion to coincide with it. Now, long story short, that rebellion fails absolutely miserably. Doesn't go well at all. So Robert, he gets captured, he gets put in here, and he's sentenced to be executed for treason. So while most people are executed in here, treason brings him back to the scene of his crime. So outside St. Catherine's Church in Dublin City, that's where his rebellion began. So he's brought there and he's executed in front of a crowd of thousands and thousands of people. Before that though, Robert's in court. He gets sentenced to be executed for treason, but they make one mistake because they give Robert one last word to say on the docks in court. Because Robert decides he's going to take full advantage of that. He gets up onto the docks, and like any true Irishman does in that situation, Robert doesn't stop speaking for an hour. He gives one of Ireland's most famous speeches. His speech influenced all the men and women I showed you up there, with some other famous names you will know. Nelson Mandela was heavily influenced by Robert's speech, and apparently Abraham Lincoln memorised that whole speech off by heart. Now it is an hour long, so I have not memorised it off by heart, to be glad to know, guys, but Robert ended his speech and he said the famous words. He says, at the end of his speech, "Until my nation takes her place among the great nations of the earth, then and only then may the epitaph on my grave be written." Which is interesting. That's why it's interesting he said that, because Robert gets executed very gruesomely. You don't want to find out that story. But he's buried outside Kilmainham jail, and if you go looking for that burial today, you won't find a thing, because the body of Robert was very soon after that stolen. It was stolen by people we assume were his followers or supporters, but we don't know. But because we don't know, to this day the grave has still not been constructed for Robert Emmet. And what it means, with the last words of that speech, he predicted it. Still to this day, the epitaph or the writing on that grave has not been written. So he's a very legendary figure in our own history for that reason. So Robert Emmet, very famous name in all of Irish history. He looks, I mean, this doesn't do any justice, and neither do the paintings you'll see. He looks very old in paintings though, but he was only 25 years old when he died. So very young to be leading a rebellion. And yeah, if you open up any Irish history book, one of the first names you're going to come across is Robert Emmet. So if you don't, throw the book away. It's not a very good history book, basically. But we're going to move on from another great reason to move on though, because we're going out into the exercise yards. We're going to tell you how to escape from this jail, if you're interested. But we're also going to talk a bit about executions. So just because this is the longest walk of the tour though, guys, this is the part where you really just need to keep with the group. Just don't get lost, because we're twisting and turning and winding and so on. So just follow me out through here, guys. We're going to the left.
Go in front of me, man.
When they take you to
Thank you.
So they wouldn't have done a long drop. They would have intentionally made it. So this is one of the many exercise yards. Most of the open space in here is used for something like exercise. An unofficial use for this space though is if you want to escape. So, best way to get out of this jail, guys, right through that gate. The reason why they choose that because there's no Kilmainham jail behind it. So if you get through the gate, you're able to run away. It is not the only way to get out though. So we do have some creative forms. For example, people would hook on a rope ladder sometimes made out of their clothes. There were spikes on the top of that wall. It wasn't to hook on a rope ladder, it was to stop you from climbing, but it did help in the event. So people hooked on and climbed over that way. Nobody managed to tunnel through the walls though. That's the first thing people come up with usually. But if you look at the thickness of those walls, guys, it's going to take you a couple of years to get through that with a spoon. So you're not going to do it in a night. What they would do to get out of the gate though, there's a story of people sneaking in at bolt cutters, cutting the lock and escaping from that way. Or my own personal favourite, one type of story pops up every single time. It uses the exact same tool that you'd use in any jail to escape. Because that tool, very simply guys, is money. You bribe a guard. Guards were extremely corrupt back then, very underpaid, still are today. And so if you bring money in, 9 times out of 10 the guards are just letting you ride out. So, one of my colleagues has a problem, guys. Just give him you get out, no problem. But yeah, most of our escapes, they happen through bribery. So if you ever find yourselves in jail, guys, as well, 50 quid is the best thing that'll get you out rather than a lockpick or anything like that. We're going to move over here though, because moving on back to the political history, guys, I haven't explained a thing about the Civil War, and I'll try and explain it to you over at this flat here. Probably a lot of them went under the radar, so we're not going up into there just yet, guys. We'll wait here because we're talking about this flat here. But yeah, we don't know. I know 3 or 4 stories, and in one of the stories, 2 lads climb over the wall with a rope ladder. One of them gets over that wall. Then he throws the rope ladder over to his friend, and as his friend's climbing over the wall, the rope snaps and he falls down onto the ground. So one of them escapes and the other one doesn't. Yeah. There's stuff like that happens. But the amount of bribery stories, maybe some of them went under the radar because I don't think the guards would have been too keen to report it as well. But at the end of the Irish War of Independence, guys, the Anglo-Irish Treaty is signed. So what it does, gives Ireland independence. But it also, for example, solidifies the divide between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and it makes the new Irish government swear an oath of allegiance to the British Crown. So some people, they don't like those terms, but they accept them, because to them it's the only chance for Irish peace and freedom, for the pro-treaty side. There are also those, though, who don't accept these terms at all, because it isn't what their friends and their colleagues had died for, and they're anti-treaty. So pro and anti-treaty collide in a civil war in 1922. Fighting lasts for 11 months, so into 1923. And in that civil war, guys, very forgotten fact, 77 executions take place in total. So this is a pro-treaty jail. We execute 6 anti-treaty prisoners on site. 4 of them are the first 4 executions of the entire civil war, and those are the ones you'll see up there. So the other 2, Leo Dowling and Terence Brady, they're part of a group of 5 executed. 2 of them we know were executed here. The reason why they're not up on a plaque though is because we only found out very recently Leo Dowling and Terence Brady were executed here. But I know for these 4 men, guys, Peter Cassie was only 21 years old and the other 3 are only 19. And if you're wondering what were these guys caught with, what caused them to be executed? Well, the Irish government, they made it punishable by death to be found with an illegal firearm. So all these boys were just caught with small revolvers in their pockets. And that's why they were lined up and shot by a group of fellow Irishmen. And to top it all off, guys, worst part, all these boys wrote a last letter to their parents. Not all of them got through to the parents first. Stories of these parents have them coming in to visit their sons for a regular visit, and on the way in, they would read the newspapers of that morning. It was from those newspapers they found out that their sons had died. So it's a very sad period in our history, the Irish Civil War. It's also, though, it's a very important period in our history to us, especially around a time like this, because 24th of May 1923 is when that Civil War officially ended. Well, that's what the date they give. It kind of fizzled out a bit more. But it means that we just commemorated that 100th anniversary a couple of months ago. So those events are still fresh in our own memories, these events included. So we're still commemorating events related to the Irish Civil War. But for a moment, guys, we're going to go back to 1916, because in through here you have the Stonebreakers Yard, where I can tell you the last bit of the Easter Rising story, if you want to just follow me in here.
The exercise yard was the execution yard as well?
No, we don't know where those boys were executed because it is fallen down. We know where these guys were executed. This was one of them. Now for the firing squad, there was a hanging yard out through there. That's where they would have done private hangings, and you way more hangings than you did firing squad executions, which was just by regular criminals.
Why were some of them you said like butchered, chopped up, and all that? What versus
Oh,
firing squad?
that wouldn't have been these guys. That was if you're tried for treason and if you're hung, drawn, and quartered, which was just before this jail was open. I think it was the year this jail opened. They outlawed hang, drawing, and quartering. So Robert Emmett, he was hung for an hour and then beheaded. The rebel you saw, I think it was like 10 years earlier, 5 years earlier. He would have been opened up and barbecued and so on. So he was actually very lucky with the method of execution he suffered.
I'd rather be shot than have my guts.
Oh Jesus!
lit on fire.
Being shot is probably the most humane way to die. A lot of people are asking for it to be brought back in America, in some countries. But now, guys, we move it over here just because you have a group here. So if you want to gather inside for a second, this is the Stonebreakers Yard.
What's a stonebreaker?
Thank you very much, sir. Stonebreakers Yard is the name of the yard because they would have broken stones down into smaller stones when they were making it. So that's why it's called stone. That's why it's called Stonebreakers, because you break stones in there, and that's where you see the small little pebbles on the ground. That was the stones they would have broken. It's originally where the stone breaking takes place, which is the hard labour for the men, but today it's probably the most important site in all of Irish history, because this is where 14 of the leaders are executed after our Easter Rising. So the names, we'll see them in a second. They're commemorated up on that plaque there, 14 of them. There's dates beside them, some of them on different dates, but they are brought one man at a time, 13 men, through that gate to stand right here by this cross. Hands tied behind their back and blindfolded, guys. They have sandbags behind them, so you won't find bullet holes in these walls, and 12 soldiers lined up with the British Army here to meet them. 6 standing, 6 kneeling, on a command they fire. So the bodies of these men brought across the Liffey to Arbor Hill Cemetery. They're thrown in a mass grave together. Quick line is spread over those bodies to dissolve the remains as well, so you can't dig them up, and they're still there to this day. This was the procedure for 13 men. One story everyone has to hear about this place is the story, you'll see it in a second, of the last man executed on that list. His name is James Connolly. And for James Connolly, he's to be executed down the opposite end there. You'll see the cross down the opposite end. So James Connolly was not a natural born Irishman, first of all.
Brett Connolly.
He's born in Edinburgh, in Scotland, to Irish parents. But he's one of Scotland and Ireland's most famous political writers. He's very well read across the world, is James Connolly. Now, during the fighting of the Easter Rising, though, guys, Connolly gets shot twice and he gets wounded. So they don't bring him here, they bring him out to Dublin Castle. Nurses of the Red Cross treat his wounds. But the problem is, already, the wounds of James Connolly had contracted gangrene. They'd become infected. So there's nothing those nurses can do. So what the nurses do, they go to the general in charge of the executions, General Maxwell. They beg him not to execute Connolly because he's going to die anyway. And as they say, just to let him die in peace. But Maxwell insists. And so it means on the early hours of the 12th of May 1916, guys, James Connolly is driven by ambulance right up to that gate. The gate doors get swung open. Connolly is stretchered out where a chair is waiting for him by the cross, and he's sat down in the chair with sandbags behind him, firing squad ready to go. It's in that moment, though, guys, they find they can't execute James Connolly. Because sitting there in that chair, guys, Connolly is slumped over. He's drifting in and out of consciousness. He's too weak to hold up even his own body weight. And they cannot get a clear shot for that reason. So what they will do is go inside, find a rope, and they tie the unconscious James Connolly back down to his chair. And that's how they execute him, tied to his chair. But with that, it's an important thing to mention to you as well, guys. I mentioned at first, the people of Ireland are not necessarily in support of those rebels because they destroyed Dublin City. But then they hear the story of James Connolly, Joseph Plunkett, and the other 12 men executed standing right here. That's when the attitude changes straight away. These men become human. People listen to their stories, they read their writings, and find that they have very similar opinions themselves in many matters. So with the fire of a bullet, guys, these men go from traitors to martyrs in Irish history. So much so that today the general in charge of the executions is known as the man who lost Ireland for Great Britain because of these actions. And if all of that is true, guys, this is also then the site where the first shots of the Irish War of Independence rang out. Because without these shots, if 3 years later our War of Independence wouldn't break out, it would not eventually lead to Irish independence. And so you can make the argument, without this moment, all across the country to this day, you wouldn't have that flag flying above our heads. That's why it's such an important moment in our history, but it is definitely that this is the site where the course of Irish history was going to change forever. And it's why we hold it so dear to us, even today. But if you want now, guys, you have a moment, you can have a look at the plaque, you can look around, but we'll just leave in a minute. I'm going to bring you through here to the old front door of our jail. Just in a second. All of them add different elements to the rebellion that happens in 1916 and 1921. And what 1921 is a culmination of all the ideas. It's almost like Ireland has done a 500-year plan. So guys, this is the old front door of the jail. You get brought here as a prisoner. You're off into your cell. And for many of them, they're never to come out of here again, unfortunately. So it's not the case for you though, guys. You're getting out. So with that, I hope you thoroughly enjoyed the tour. I have to end it here because this is the last stop. So if you did enjoy the tour, guys, thank you very much. My name is Harry. If you didn't, my name is David. Thank you very much. All right, but we're going out through here. Before we go, you'll hear a lot of words. A lot of those didn't get to hear because you're all free to go. So if you have any questions, you ask me, guys, but follow me out and enjoy. Thank you. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to bring you down to the front door, guys. We have a gift shop, cafe, toilets, anything you need just in through here. So I'll show you where we're going now. As well as that, any questions,
Me.
So 4 years before this jail, the first capstone was laid. 1784, this hill was used for public executions. 1784, there's a 13-year-old boy executed on this hill. And also, we go down through here, there's a lady burnt at the stake on this hill as well. So we were just about passed through that time. Just 4 years earlier when we opened, we would have probably had a bit more of an interesting history in terms of execution.
What did they kill a 13-year-old boy for?
What?
Why did they kill a 13?
I don't know. I don't know. Probably murder of some sort.
Yeah.
Now, but guys, if you want, just in through here, we have a cafe, toilets upstairs, on the first floor to the right, in on the right as well, on the ground floor there's a gift shop if you want to have a look, and there's loads of exhibits in here as well. So if I'm here, guys, if you have any questions, you let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, mate.
I'll be here, guys, if you have any questions, you let me know.
Alright, well, maybe you won't find that. Alright. Stairs.
That's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Please hit the subscribe button.